Howdy out there. It's going to be a little noisy inside the store trying to be sure this doggone new computer is going to work to get me on YouTube. I've chosen to talk about something near and dear to my heart, the Columbine tragedy. I spent 6 years in the Jefferson County public school system, and as I was leaving there, I went to Sheridan, Wyoming as superintendent. I took Lou Finch with me as an assistant superintendent. From that point forward, he surpassed me in ability and in jobs, and was back as Jefferson County school superintendent just prior to the Columbine tragedy. I wept when it happened. I could weep easily again now. Those people in that school district are near and dear to me, and that Columbine school is incidentally a Jefferson County public school. The address the mail comes from is Littleton, and people got the idea it was a Littleton school. It is not. Wasn't and isn't. Darrell Scott, whose daughter Rachel was killed and whose son watched other classmates being killed right in front of his eyes, got a chance to speak to this national group, and they didn't particularly want to hear what he said, were shocked by what he said, and didn't really want to hear what he said. But I want to share it with you, even though it's old news. This that I'm using was picked up off of the internet by somebody that knew that it would be important to me, and I want to share it and comment about his final plea, his plea to allow prayer in the public schools. He starts out in his address to them, pointing out, as a good Christian, that since the dawn of creation, it has been established that there's both good and evil in the hearts of men and women, that we all contain the seeds of kindness and or the seeds of violence. And he goes on to say that the deaths of his child and other children must not go in vain. He says later, quote, "In the days that followed the Columbine tragedy, I was amazed at how quickly fingers were pointed at groups such as the NRA." He says, "I am not a member of the NRA. I am not a hunter. I do not even own a gun. I am not here to represent or defend the NRA because I don't believe that they are responsible for my daughter's death. Therefore, I do not believe that they need to be defended. If I believed they had anything to do with Rachel's murder, I would be their strongest opponent." And he goes on, and I'm going to paraphrase, to say that it was a spiritual event to wake us Americans up. And by the way, I was impressed then, and I'm still impressed now, at the furor over the killings at Columbine. There have been a lot of different killings before Columbine in the public schools, and there's been several since, including the terrible thing at the Virginia College. You know what really shocked people? In my opinion, up until that, this was poor people or rural people, hunters, communities that, were into carrying guns and so on. This was rich people's kids killing other rich people's kids in a hallowed, wonderful community. The Evergreen community, when I first went up there as principal at Evergreen Junior High, was about half real old folks. I don't mean old folks, old mountain people, mountain families, and a smattering of really nice homes put in by those that worked for Martin Marietta and other war industries. By the time I left it, and as the years went by, there's not many of the old originals left. It's almost entirely a rich man's community. And the southern part of it, down where Columbine was, is definitely upper middle class, to say the least. Well, he went on to read a poem to those congressional people, and he said, "Your laws ignore our deepest needs. Your words are empty air. You have stripped away our heritage. You have outlawed simple prayer. Now gunshots fill our classrooms and precious children die. You seek for answers everywhere and ask the question, why? You regulate restrictive laws through legislative greed, and yet you fail to understand that God is what we need. In his ball, in his presentation, then he went on to say that we're three-part human beings, that we are men and women that have body, mind, and spirit. I'm skipping. It's his punchline about prayer. As, quote, as my son Craig lay under the table in the school library and saw his two friends murdered before his very eyes, he did not hesitate to pray in school. I defy any law or politician to deny him that right. I challenge every young person in America and around the world to realize that on April the 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School, prayer was brought back to our schools. Do not let the many prayers offered to those students be in vain. Dare to move into the new millennium with a sacred disregard for legislation that violates your God-given right to communicate with Him. End of what I'm going to quote. Of that particular section. Later he says, my daughter's death will not be in vain. The young people of this country will not allow that to happen. Well, as school superintendent for 21 years, from the very smallest schools to medium or moderate sized schools at Sheridan, Wyoming, Alamosa, Colorado, Somerton, Arizona, I went to the AASA conventions, national conventions almost every year, state conventions, heard lots and lots of speakers. I was in a situation at one time where a Jewish lawyer in a community challenged our Christmas program. And I said, I thought the lady did a good job in that she had Hanukkah songs and songs from different cultures and so on, as well as the traditional American religious type songs. And no, I'm not going to do anything about it. He said, you're going to force me to take you to court to get my constitutional rights? I said, if you want to do it, you'll have to do it. I am not going to be the Grinch that steals the Christmas programs that we're having. Well, he depended on business and would have been hurt if he had pressed it, so he didn't press it. But he probably would have won if he had. And here's the problem, and it's the same problem that has to do with prayer in the schools. Sure, you can't keep anybody from praying. Real praying is a one-on-one, an individual praying to God. Now, I've been a church elder, a church deacon. I've filled the pulpit a few times, and I've had to pray in public a number of times. Don't do a very good job of public prayer. My ego gets in the way. I ought to be doing a better job of expressing to God what we are praying for. And I think that's why public prayer is not probably the prayer that God really is interested in at all. Because He knows us well. He knows our shortcomings. He knows that public prayer isn't necessarily from the heart. It may be from the head to make the right impressions and so on and so forth. And it's public prayer that you can't have in the school, and you can't prevent anybody from praying privately in school. Impossible. You couldn't keep them from praying. Every test I ever took that was hard, if I was worried about it, it was important to me, I said a little prayer. But that was between me and God. It had nothing to do with my Baptist background coming out in front of a class, if I was the teacher or the superintendent or principal doing it. You can't have prayer because it can offend those that don't agree. You got people like my brother that think that it's only that his particular hard-shell Baptist group has the gates to heaven, and the rest of us won't get there. You can't have a guy like that leading prayer in a classroom. And that's why, Mr. Scott, I cry with him. I understand. But he's got to understand his child and all children have the right to pray. They just shouldn't have the right to stand up and lead a class prayer. I hope you understand. We're a great country. We are a nationality country. We are a multicolors country. We're a wonderful country. God bless us all.